They called it Solid Rock. Why did everyone need one man to hold it up? Netflix's three-part documentary, The Pastor's Wife, examines the death of Mica Miller, the wife of John Paul Miller, pastor of Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The series begins with Mica calling 911 from a remote state park. She asks whether the dispatcher can locate her phone. Then she says she is about to kill herself and wants her family to know where to find her. By the end, investigators have ruled her death a suicide. Her family believes John Paul is responsible, and nearly every finger in the documentary is pointing toward the pastor. But before Detective Boy asks what happened to Mica, Detective Boy wants to inspect the name hanging over the entire story: Solid Rock. In Christian language, solid rock means an unshakable foundation, safety, refuge, permanence, God. And that name becomes especially interesting when Mica's family first arrives in Myrtle Beach. They are new to the city, looking for somewhere to begin, and they stop at a church called Solid Rock. A few years later, her mother and stepfather divorce. The family loses its home, and for a while, they live in a hotel. The family does not merely attend. Mica takes the divorce hardest and makes church her life. She becomes a worship leader, an assistant, a servant, a pastor's wife. The church becomes home, purpose, calling, identity, stability, and a place where God appears to live. But the building never promised any of that. The rock never testified. Meaning did. Mica later says she never wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps by getting divorced. Then, while married to Jeremy, the so-called godly man, she enters an affair with John Paul, the pastor who officiated their wedding. She fears divorce, then chooses the very act capable of producing the result she fears. After that marriage ends, she marries John Paul. Now the second marriage has to hold up far more than two people. It has to redeem the affair, justify two broken marriages, preserve the church, restore the pastor, erase the identity of the other woman, and prove that all of it can somehow bring God glory. That is too much weight for any form to carry. Mica says she is not even 30, already has one divorce under her belt, and before adding another, she wants to say she tried everything. There it is. The marriage is no longer simply a marriage. It is evidence. Evidence that she did not become her mother. Evidence that the affair was not a mistake. Evidence that the wedding meant something. Evidence that God had not abandoned the structure. And John Paul arrives carrying his own foundation. He says he grew up thinking there was something terribly wrong with him. He says he probably had the worst childhood anyone could imagine. He says Christian people hurt him, that being hurt by Christians was the worst, and that he grew up hating Christians. Then he becomes a Christian pastor. He says there is no such thing as a perfect earthly father, and that his father never won Father of the Year. His father becomes the failed authority. Then John Paul becomes pastor, father, husband, leader, and authority. Mica arrives carrying the fear of becoming her mother. John Paul arrives carrying the thought that something is terribly wrong with him. Two private foundations meet, and the relationship is assigned the job of making both of them solid. Then the congregation adds more weight. They call John Paul charismatic. They call his sermons therapy. They call him gifted, anointed, shepherd, mentor, and man of God. But before John Paul can violate what a pastor is supposed to be, somebody has to decide what a pastor is supposed to be. Define it, assign it, expect it, compare the body against it, then judge the body for failing the meaning that was assigned. 10 people can place 10 meanings on the same pastor: protector, counselor, moral authority, spiritual guide, voice of God. Agreement makes the assignment appear objective. Then everybody forgets who supplied it. The same thing happens with the Bible. The Bible says submit. The Bible says honor your husband. The Bible says leave your family and cling to your spouse. The Bible says a wife is a helpmate. The Bible says God hates divorce. But the Bible never stood up in solid rock and applied itself to Mica's marriage. People selected words, interpreted them, applied them to Mica, and announced their interpretation as the voice of God. The form said God. The content kept saying John Paul. Meet his needs, respect his authority, protect his reputation, preserve his marriage, forgive his conduct, keep him in the pulpit. Do not let the church collapse. Every sermon selected by the documentary circles sex, lust, rejection, temptation, wives, forgiveness, and unmet needs. John Paul says a wife is not responsible if her husband falls, then says that as his helpmate, she can keep Satan from placing other women before his eyes. Her responsibility is denied in one sentence, then quietly restored in the next. His desire becomes a need. Her refusal becomes danger. His choice disappears behind Satan, temptation, rejection, and a hardened heart. And the congregation listens, returns, applauds, calls it preaching. Then later says one man controlled everything. Come on. A pastor requires followers. A special leader requires people who want to be specially led. A scapegoat requires a community willing to place its guilt somewhere else. The congregation does not get to point toward John Paul and quietly leave the courtroom. Everybody is a person of interest. Who called charisma character? Who called sermons therapy? Who restored him after the affair? Who attended the wedding while privately opposing it? Who applauded while he described his absent wife as mentally ill? Who allowed elders to exist without authority over the pastor? Who made Mica believe exposing John Paul could turn people away from Christ? Who needed one man to keep solid rock standing? Then the structure moves. Mica leaves. Divorce papers are served. She purchases a gun, drives to a remote park, calls 911, asks to be located, and says she is about to kill herself. John Paul says he is at a soccer event surrounded by other people. Investigators ruled the death a suicide. But the documentary has already assigned him too much guilt to let the ruling end the story. So another phrase appears: murder by suicide. Now the verdict survives either way. If another body pulled the trigger, John Paul is guilty. If Mica's body pulled the trigger, John Paul is still guilty. If murder cannot hold him, harassment can hold him. If the death investigation closes, another investigation can open. Then somebody says the quiet part aloud. We got him with something. That is no longer an investigation looking for where the evidence leads. That is a verdict looking for somewhere to land. The ego's thought system is complete. One must become the sinner, so the other can become the saint. Mica becomes devotion, hope, love, innocence, and light. John Paul becomes deception, control, corruption, abuse, and death. But earlier, Mica was the other woman, and John Paul was the anointed pastor, worthy of forgiveness. The roles changed. The split remained. The ego does not care which body carries guilt. It only needs guilt to have an address. And all of this requires the past, old sermons, old messages, old photographs, old diagnoses, old marriages, old injuries. Bodies speaking now about bodies and events that appear to be gone. Then memory assembles a character and says, this is who he is. This is who she was. A Course in Miracles gives the clue. I see only the perishable.
I see nothing that will last. What I see is not real. What I see is a form of vengeance. Pastor, wife, husband, church, marriage, gun, body, death, victim, abuser. Perishable forms, appearances given meaning, then prosecuted as though the meaning lived inside them. The documentary places John Paul on the witness stand. Detective Boy calls the family, the friends, the counselors, the congregation, the filmmakers, the audience. Everybody who helped make one man the answer, then needed the same man to become the problem. Solid rock was supposed to mean an unshakable foundation. Yet the church scattered, the marriage ended, the building was offered for sale. The pastor became the scapegoat, and everybody kept pointing toward one perishable body, as though removing him could make the structure solid again. But the rock never appointed John Paul. The rock never commanded Mica to stay. The rock never interpreted the Bible. The rock never divided sinner from saint. The rock never demanded vengeance. The rock remained silent while everybody made it testify. If God was the foundation, why did everyone need one man to hold it up?